A federal judge is openly challenging the Trump administration's immigration crackdown, and the stakes are rising fast. The chief federal judge in Minnesota has ordered the head of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to personally appear in court and warned this could be held in contempt if the order is not complied with. Chief Judge Patrick Schiltz says the administration has failed to follow court orders requiring bond hearings for detained immigrants. In a sharply worded order, Schiltz said ICE sent thousands of agents into Minnesota without preparing for the flood of legal challenges that followed. The judge ordered ICE's acting director, Todd Lyons, to explain why the agency repeatedly ignored judicial directives. This escalation comes just one day after President Donald Trump ordered border czar Tom Homan to take control of immigration operations in Minnesota. That move followed the second death this month involving immigration enforcement officers in the state. Trump said he held great calls with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, echoing earlier White House statements. The administration had initially blamed Democratic leaders for protests against immigration raids. But after the killing of Alex Pretti and videos suggesting he posed no active threat, the White House shifted strategy. Tom Homan replaced Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino as head of the Minnesota operation. Despite the leadership change, immigration agents were still active across the Twin Cities. Some neighborhoods in South Minneapolis appeared calm, even as unmarked federal convoys had been seen there for weeks. Local reporters spotted immigration agents in northeast Minneapolis and the suburb of Little Canada. Judge Schiltz's order followed a separate federal hearing where Minnesota officials asked for a halt to the immigration enforcement surge. That judge said a ruling would be prioritized, but gave no timeline. Schiltz acknowledged that ordering a federal agency head into court is extraordinary, but he said ICE's repeated violations of court orders were equally extraordinary, and lesser measures had failed. The case centers on an Ecuadorian immigrant identified as Juan T.R., detained despite a court order for a bond hearing. Court records show the order was issued in January and still not followed days later. Judge Schiltz said the ICE director's court appearance will be canceled only if the detainee is released. Messages seeking comment from ICE and the Department of Homeland Security have so far gone unanswered.
The White House is scrambling to contain a political firestorm after explosive video evidence appeared to contradict its initial claims about a deadly federal shooting in Minnesota, forcing President Donald Trump's administration into a rapid and highly visible retreat. The victim, Alex Pretti, was shot dead by U.S. Border Patrol agents during an encounter that immediately ignited controversy and outrage across Minnesota and Washington alike. In the hours after the shooting, senior Trump administration figures described Pretti as a violent threat, portraying him as a domestic terrorist who intended to assassinate law enforcement officers. Those claims were broadcast forcefully by figures close to the president, including senior White House advisor Stephen Miller and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. But that narrative began to unravel as video footage surfaced and spread rapidly online, showing Pretti tackled to the ground, disarmed, and then shot repeatedly in the back. The footage appeared to directly contradict the administration's claims and intensified accusations that the White House had rushed to judgment before the facts were known. Officials soon realized that the language used to describe Pretti had transformed the killing into a much deeper political liability for the president. By Monday, the tone inside the White House had shifted dramatically. At a press briefing, Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt avoided repeating the earlier claims and instead stressed that investigations were ongoing and that no final conclusions should be drawn.
Thanks, Caroline. I want to go back to some of the comments from Stephen Miller and Secretary Note. You've made clear the president wants to see the investigation play out when answering some of the questions on the specific details. Is he concerned that some of those definitive statements made by other officials risks public perception of the credibility of those investigations now?
Again, the president believes that these investigations are credible, they are continuing, they are active, and he wants to let them play out. Alex.
Caroline, thank you. Is the administration willing to separate DHS funding from other funding bills in order to avoid a broader shutdown?
Look, at this point, the White House supports the bipartisan work that was done to advance the bipartisan appropriations package, and we want to see that passed. Policy discussions on immigration in Minnesota are happening. Look, the president is leading those discussions as evidenced by his correspondence with Governor Walz this morning, but that should not be at the expense of government funding for the American people, which would include, as you know, Alex, FEMA funding, and we are in the midst of the storm that took place over the weekend, and many Americans are still being impacted by that. So we absolutely do not want to see that funding lapse, and we want the Senate to move forward with passing the bipartisan appropriations package that was negotiated on a bipartisan basis.
Leavitt insisted the president had not personally characterized Pretti in the same terms used by his advisors, and said Trump wanted the facts to guide the process.
On Saturday, the Department of Homeland Security posted that Pretti looks like he wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. Stephen Miller on Saturday posted that, or called Pretti a would-be assassin. Why did administration officials jump to conclusions before an investigation had even been conducted?
Well, look, this has obviously been a very fluid and fast-moving situation throughout the weekend. As for President Trump, whom I speak for, he has said that he wants to let the investigation continue and let the facts lead in this case.
Thank you, Caroline. FBI Director Kash Patel said in a Sunday interview, quote, "You cannot bring a firearm loaded with multiple magazines to any sort of protest." Does the president believe the Second Amendment rights remain in effect even when protesting?
The president supports the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding American citizens. Absolutely. There has been no greater supporter or defender of the right to bear arms than President Donald J. Trump. So while Americans have a constitutional right to bear arms, Americans do not have a constitutional right to impede lawful immigration enforcement operations. And any gun owner knows that when you are carrying a weapon, when you are bearing arms and you are confronted by law enforcement, you are raising the assumption of risk and the risk of force being used against you. And again, that's unfortunately what took place on Saturday.
Behind the scenes, administration officials privately acknowledged that the situation had spun out of control. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche attempted to soften the administration's stance in a television interview, suggesting that no one had meant to apply the legal definition of domestic terrorism to the incident. His comments were widely seen as an effort to diffuse growing criticism that the administration had criminalized the victim without evidence. The rapid shift in messaging highlighted how reactive the White House had become as support for aggressive immigration enforcement tactics began to falter even among Republicans on Capitol Hill. President Trump also appeared to pivot personally. After initially blaming Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Democrats for the killing in social media posts, Trump announced that he had spoken directly with Walz and described the call as productive. He said both sides were now on the same wavelength about how to proceed.
Back to the call with Governor Walz this morning, the president described it as respectful. He said, "We seem to be on a similar wavelength," but you had strong criticism for the governor and the Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Frey, just now. So could you explain the difference in tone between what the president had said in his True Social post and I think some of the criticisms that you just levied from the podium?
Fran, I think the criticisms that I laid out, I'm painting the picture for all of you in this room, are what led to the moment that we are in today, where Governor Walz and President Trump are having a conversation, a constructive and productive conversation to end the chaos and the lawlessness that has taken place in Governor Walz's state.
Walz's office confirmed that Trump had agreed to consider pulling federal agents out of Minnesota and to allow state investigators to conduct an independent probe. Minnesota officials had complained that federal agents blocked them from accessing the shooting scene even after a court order was obtained. Trump also announced he would send his border czar, Tom Homan, to oversee operations in Minneapolis and replace the Border Patrol official in charge. The move appeared to sideline Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and hinted at internal divisions within the administration. Despite this, Leavitt continued to place blame on Minnesota's Democratic leadership, arguing the tragedy stemmed from resistance to federal enforcement.